Warning: Operation Gamer contains graphic language, violence, and adult situations that may not be suitable for audiences under the age of 18. Viewer discretion is advised. So get off your lazy fucking ass and actually do some motherfucking parenting.
You gotta be fucking kidding me. Congratulations on completing your last mission, gamer. Today you'll be visited by one of your childhood heroes? Hulk Hogan? Hulk Hogan is coming here? What you gonna do, brother, when Hulkamania runs wild on you? Weren't you taller in the films? Alright, come on in. So what the fuck are we playing today? Godzilla Monsters of Monsters? I remember this when I was 5! Godzilla Monsters of Monsters is one of the first and only games that Toho actually developed for the NES. It's actually the first Godzilla game ever to be made for a console, and as the first attempt at a Godzilla game, it's not that bad or good for that matter. The story to Godzilla Monsters of Monsters for the most part is straight out of a Godzilla movie. If we had to pick one G-flick this game is based on, it would loosely resemble Invasion of the Astro Monsters, aka Godzilla vs. Monster Zero. Basically, the story goes something like this. Planet X has declared war on the Earth for reasons that are not fully explained in the game. So they send their fleet of warships and space monsters towards our galaxy and basically challenge the Earth, as well as Godzilla and Mothra, to a monster royal rumble using our entire solar system. Godzilla Monsters of Monsters is basically a side-scroller action game. You start off on Earth, and from the beginning of the game you'll notice that you're able to not only control the king of the monsters himself, Godzilla, but also his frenemy, Mothra. Basically, the objective of the game is to move Godzilla and Mothra around the map, which sort of acts like a board game. Godzilla can only move 2 spaces on the map per turn, while Mothra is able to move 4 spaces on the map per turn. After you've advanced your monsters to the maximum spaces they can move, you're taken to a side-scroller stage, in which Godzilla or Mothra basically have to get from the beginning of the stage to the end of the stage, while battling their way through various military weapons created by Planet X. To spice up the game mechanic a bit, There are also a certain number of enemy space monsters on each stage that can move across the map as well. At any given time, you, or a space monster, can challenge each other to a battle, if you're within the vicinity of each other. Battles, for the most part, play out sort of like an early version of Street Fighter, or King of the Monsters for that matter. The main objective of each stage is to get from the starting point of the map to the enemy's base. Once you've stomped a mud hole in the enemy's base, you're transported to the next map, where you basically do the same thing all over again. There are 8 stages in total. The first 7 stages are based off the 7 planets of the solar system. Well, before Pluto was downgraded. The 8th stage in the game, which is the final stage, takes place on Planet X. Godzilla Monsters of Monsters has several noticeable flaws. The first major annoying flaw in the game, you'll encounter during the second map, is the one-hit comets. These glowing weapons of mass destruction are 95% of the time one-hit kills for Godzilla, and require careful and rather silly dodging tactics to avoid them. If you're Mothra, dodging these bastards becomes much easier, since she can basically fly over them most of the time. However, Godzilla's only way of avoiding them is either by doing an electric slide across the floor, or using his pitiful jumping skill. Seriously, what the fuck is up with those comets? Unless you're fucking Mothra, it's virtually impossible to dodge these comets without getting hit as Godzilla. The next major flaw of the game is the enemy base mechanic. In order to advance through the stage, both of your monsters must actually destroy the base. There's a trick you can use in order to advance to the next stage, which requires most of the time killing off one of the monsters before you click advance to the next stage. But even that can become rather tedious after the 3rd or 4th stage. Another glaring issue with this game is the lazy level design. For the most part, most of the stages are basically palette swaps of previous maps, with virtually little to no variation in regards to the enemies you encounter. And another thing, what's up with those maps? They're basically palette swaps of previous stages. Speaking of enemies, you'll also be annoyed at the fact that every space monster you've destroyed in previous maps is resurrected for the next one. Something that could get extremely annoying, that the space monsters also do from time to time, is retreat during a battle. It happens when you least expect it, and most of the time cheats you out of leveling up a level. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, there's this weird level up system in the game, in which Godzilla and Mothra can level up by destroying a certain amount of enemies or space monsters. This allows Godzilla or Mothra's health and special ability meter to rise. The special abilities for the most part come in handy. In Godzilla's case, he has the atomic nuclear breath, while in Mothra's case, she has the shitty pollen attack. As for the space monsters, there's a rather impressive list of classic Godzilla villains. Fans of the Godzilla films will be pleased to know Gigan, Mechagodzilla, Hedra, Baragon, and King Ghidorah are all in the game. However, they're also joined by other monsters from other Toho films like Gazora, Morgera, and Varan. Their inclusion in the game is kind of odd, considering Godzilla has plenty of other enemies from his universe that could have been included in the game, like Megalon and Anguirus. Overall, Godzilla Monsters of Monsters isn't really a bad game. If you can get past several of its noticeable flaws, there's a lot of fun to be had with the game. But it's far from being a stellar Godzilla title, and sadly the best of the Godzilla games featured on a Nintendo system, which is not saying a whole lot. Godzilla Monsters of Monsters gets 2 out of a possible 4. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a terrible game, but the repetitive stages, one-hit comets, lazy palette swaps, and odd choices of monsters Godzilla fights in the game make this less than a stellar Godzilla game. So, short stuff, got anything else to play? Godzilla 2? I didn't even know this game existed! I guess those slimy bastards from Planet X are back for revenge. Godzilla 2, War of the Monsters, a game so rare, or should I say so bad, it was pulled off the shelves very soon after its release. Unlike its predecessor, Godzilla Monsters of Monsters, Godzilla 2 decides to take a different approach. Instead of being a side-scroller action-adventure game, it's a turn-based strategy game. To make matters even worse, you don't actually play as Godzilla or any of the other monsters featured in the game. You get to play as the tanks and the jets, the same tanks and jets that never have an effect on Godzilla. What the fuck is this shit? Whose bright idea was it to make a turn-based strategy Godzilla game? Who the fuck wants to play as the jets and the tanks? When you turn on a Godzilla game, you expect to play as the king of the monsters himself. Godzilla 2 War of the Monsters doesn't even really have a story. You get a really crappy cinematic sequence in the beginning of the game that suggests Godzilla's attacking, and that you have to scramble, but that's about it. Considering the title says Godzilla 2 War of the Monsters, you would expect that this would be a direct sequel to Godzilla Monsters of Monsters, and pick up where the story ended in that game. But there's no indication of this in the American version. Now I've heard rumor that the Japanese version of this game's story actually does tie into the first one. Supposedly in the Japanese version, the people of Planet X are back for revenge, and this time have taken control of Godzilla and Rodan, along with a bunch of other space monsters, to do their bidding. That rumor seems plausible, considering one of the later stages in the game seems to parallel the events of Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, aka Invasion of the Astro Monsters. Anyway, like I said before, Godzilla 2 is a turn-based strategy game. Each turn, Godzilla, and whatever monster is joining him for that stage, will move a few spaces. Then you get to scramble either some jets or tanks across the board a few spaces. The objective of each stage is to defeat the monsters on the board, which requires some sense of strategy. When you're near any of the monsters on the board, you have the option to attack them, which whisk you away to some sort of turn-based mechanic. One of the major flaws about this mechanic is the amount of damage you do is randomized. You have to play some random type of slots game to determine whether your attack hits and how much damage it does to the monster. Unfortunately, there's no tutorial, and the manual is really vague as to what each symbol in the minigame represents, so most of the time you'll be button mashing, hoping to land a critical hit against the monster. Thanks to the random factor of this game, stages take a significantly long time to finish. It can range anywhere between 30 minutes to 3 hours to complete a stage, assuming you don't get stomped out by the computer, which happens often. Honestly, most gamers will find themselves turning off the game 10 to 15 minutes into stage 1. There's not even a true ending to the game. Once you complete a stage, you get a congratulations screen, and then are whisked back to the stage select screen. That's another thing. Why is there a stage select screen, and why does every stage have the same lame ending? You would figure based on the amount of hours you put into the game, they could at least give you a stellar ending like Godzilla Monsters of Monsters, but no, you get this shitty end credit sequence. Graphically, Godzilla 2 looks pretty good on the NES. Godzilla and several of the monsters featured in the game, which include Hedra, King Ghidorah, Baragon, and Rodan just to name a few, look actually like they do in the films. One of the worst things about this game, other than its crappy mechanics, is the music. Oh god, that fucking music. You hear the same fucking tune play on every fucking stage in one continuous fucking loop. It makes you want to grab the nearest sharp object and rupture your eardrums just to make it stop. With that being said, Godzilla 2 War of the Monsters is a disappointing game that should have never been made. Avoid it at all costs. Godzilla 2 gets half a star out of a possible 4. Did I just fucking kill you with a jet? When in the fucking movies did you ever get killed by a fucking jet? Seriously, did the programmers even fucking watch any of the Godzilla movies? At this rate, you figure it's based off the TriStar movie. There's only one fucking problem with that. This game was made 10 years before that fucking movie was. You got anything else to play that's not shitty? In my experience, for the exception of Mario Brothers, anytime you see the word super in front of a game, it tends to be anything but super. And that's the case with Super Godzilla, the first Godzilla SNES game to be featured on the console. Unlike the previous NES installments, Super Godzilla for the most part tries to follow the 90s Godzilla films in terms of its story, but takes a few liberties. Apparently some alien invaders have come to Earth to wage war on us. Fortunately for us, the Japanese Defense Forces have devised a mind control device to control Godzilla. Okay, that's a bit odd, but plausible. They did control Godzilla and destroy all monsters via a device, so we'll let that one slide. In Super Godzilla, thankfully you get to play as Godzilla again, but unlike the previous two games, again the game mechanics have been changed for better and for worse. The first section of each stage basically has you controlling Godzilla through a city. The objective is to get Godzilla to the location of the monster in a certain amount of time. Now, considering you're Godzilla, king of the monsters, you would assume you could just walk through the buildings and get to your destination with ease. But no, that would make too much sense for a Godzilla game. For reasons beyond my comprehension, whenever Godzilla plows through a building, he takes a significant amount of damage. Also, whenever Godzilla is attacked by a puny little tank, he takes a significant amount of damage. So basically, you have to plot a course to the monster you need to battle in each stage, without encountering gunfire or running into a building, which completely goes against everything a Godzilla game should stand for. When you actually do make it to the boss of each stage, you're transported to a quasi-turn-based game mechanic, in which you have to land a hit on your foe, move back a little, and then select an attack from a list that randomly pulls up. I'm not even sure what genre to even classify Super Godzilla in. I guess it's supposed to be an action RPG of some sort, hidden under the guise of a side-scroller. I just like to call it shit. Despite the crappy game mechanics, there's a lot of elements featured in the game that could have made this the best Godzilla game released for its time. For starters, there are a lot of epic cutscenes during the turn-based mechanic. The score featured in the game is pretty good also, and unlike previous installments, the list of monsters featured actually are enemies of Godzilla. In fact, something that most hardcore Godzilla fans will be amazed by is the fact Bagan is the last boss in the game. For those of you at home asking, who's Bagan, he was originally supposed to be a monster Godzilla would have faced off against in what we know as Godzilla vs. Destroya. But for unexplained reasons, Toho canned that idea. Apparently they even have a Bagan suit hidden somewhere at Toho. But I'm getting off topic. Despite a great cast of monsters and some awesome cutscenes, one cannot deny that the game fucking sucks. The mechanics ruin it, and one will find themselves getting bored with the game by the third stage. Super Godzilla gets 1.5 stars out of a possible 4. It's shit! Next! Please don't tell me that's Super Godzilla 2. And please don't tell me that's a fucking turn-based strategy game. Godzilla, Kaiju Daikasen. One of the games most people will say huh over. Don't remember that title growing up? Well, that's because it was never released in America for the SNES. It's actually the second Godzilla title featured on the SNES, and sadly is the best Godzilla game that you never got to play. Just like the previous installments, once again, the game mechanics have been changed for better and for worse. I think by this time, Toho finally realized their past Godzilla games were less than stellar, so they opted to do something a bit unconventional with this game. Considering Street Fighter II was making buckets of money at the time, it seemed only appropriate, or should I say inappropriate, to blatantly rip off that game. Yeah, that's right, folks. Godzilla Kaiju Daikasen is a Street Fighter clone. You get to play not only as Godzilla, but 7 other monsters, which include Anguirus, King Ghidorah, Gigan, Mothra, Mechagodzilla, Biollante, and of all things, Megalon? Yeah, Megalon, bitches. Remember that shitty Godzilla film from the 70s? Well, Megalon actually is pretty top tier in this game. I don't know how that works out, but whatever. As stated before, Godzilla Kaiju Daikasen is a fighting game that uses a 4-button layout. Just like any other Street Fighter clone, each monster has its own special moves, which oddly resemble the same motions as those found in Street Fighter. Also, to capitalize on the success of Super Street Fighter 2, Godzilla Kaiju Daikasen has super moves that you can perform after building up your super bar. Sounds like an awesome game, right? Wrong, there's a ton of flaws with the game. If you're gonna make a fucking Street Fighter ripoff, at least make it a fucking good one. For starters, all the monsters move around very sluggish. Unlike Street Fighter 2, the movements don't look convincing or natural. The fight scenes actually look about as unnatural as those found in a Godzilla film. Whether this was done intentionally or not beats me, but when making a fighting game, the characters shouldn't come off stiff-looking. Another issue with the game is actually certain characters have an unfair disadvantage over others. Let's take Mothra for example. Most of the time she's too fast to be hit and can fly high into the air, where neither Godzilla or any of the other ground-based monsters can hit her. Certain characters have a distinct power creep, which can't be rivaled by the rest of the roster. Another thing that bothers me is the lack of proper story featured in the game. There's no cutscenes, and based on the ending, one has to assume the story is based off the 90s Godzilla films. Considering this is a Street Fighter clone, it would have been nice if they at least paid attention to detail, and gave every monster their own unique ending cutscene. But sadly, that would have been asking for too much apparently. Other than those noticeable flaws, the game actually is pretty fun for a hardcore Godzilla fan. It's not a great game, but considering your other options, it's passable, just barely. Godzilla Kaiju Daikasen gets 2 stars out of a possible 4. It's shit too. You need to go. Well, it was a real pleasure meeting you and all. Thanks for visiting. We gotta do this again sometime. It was really cool having you over. Not. And take your shitty ass games with you. All I wanna fucking do is play one fucking decent Godzilla game. Is that too much to fucking ask for? Oh no, I'm not playing another shitty Godzilla game. I'm a fucking glutton for punishment.